In the headlines, Korea's local election candidates give a final push on the last day of their campaigning. Over 80% of the country's population is eligible to vote at over 13,000 polling stations nationwide. Samsung Group's de facto holding company Samsung Everland says it's going public in the first quarter of 2015. And the U.S. Forces Korea says the U.S. is considering deploying its missile defense system in South Korea.
Hello and welcome to the program. I'm Sean Lim.
And I'm Kang Chae-ri. Thanks for joining us. Today is the final day of campaigning for candidates running in the local elections. By this time tomorrow, Koreans will have already cast their ballots and the vote counting will have begun.
Pundits say the results from tomorrow's local elections are especially important as they will be a litmus test of the Park Geun-hye administration in the wake of last month's deadly ferry disaster. Our Park Ji-won tells us more.
The country's rival political parties are engaged in one final push to win the hearts of undecided voters on this Tuesday, the last day of the 13-day campaigning period. These elections are increasingly being seen as a vote of confidence for the Park Geun-hye administration, with last month's tragic ferry disaster hitting the incumbent government hard. The ruling Saenuri Party is calling on the public to give them one more chance to revamp and reform the government in the wake of the disaster.
I earnestly plead with voters to give us strength and another chance so President Park could make a new Korea. Our party, by helping the president, will build a new Korea.
The main opposition, New Politics Alliance for Democracy, is calling on voters to hold the ruling party responsible for the government's poor handling of the tragedy.
The Saenuri Party is already asking us to forget about the Seoul ferry. They asked voters to forget about it and wipe the tears of the president by helping her. We'll never forget the Seoul ferry disaster.
Over 13,000 polling stations around the nation will open at 6 a.m. on Wednesday and close at 6 p.m. More than 11% of eligible voters already cast their ballots in early voting held late last week. Park Ji-won, Arirang News.
So millions of voters are heading to the polls tomorrow.
Right, and the National Election Commission forecasts a high voter turnout of 60%, which is up 6% from the last local elections 4 years ago.
So what are we expecting to see tomorrow and how the voter turnout will impact the outcome of the elections? Of course, to tell us more, Chi Byung-gil is joining us in the studio. So tell us how the candidates spent their last day of their campaigning.
Well, Cherry, remember how I've been reporting on how this year's elections have especially been toned down due to the Seoul ferry accident, right? So rival parties are making the most of their last-minute efforts to pull in as many votes as they can. They continued with what they've been doing for the last 2 weeks, shaking hands and talking with the people at subway stations and traditional markets. And they don't have much time left now, so the official campaign period ends at midnight Tuesday, which is just about 2 hours from now. And tomorrow, Koreans will head to the polls between 6 a.m. to 6 p.m. to select nearly 4,000 local administrative and legislative officials.
So last Friday and Saturday, we saw the local elections institute the early voting system, and there was a very high turnout for that. How is that expected to affect the overall results?
Well, Sean, the analysts are actually divided on that question, and Professor Han Gyu-sup of Seoul National University said it could go both ways.
So we don't really know what it means. I mean, it could possibly mean that people who probably wouldn't have voted may have actually turned out, or it could just be the same people who would have voted anyway, even without this early vote.
But he did say it is likely that the young people will be supporting the opposition party and the older generation voting for the conservative ruling party.
Now, we of course have to go back to the April ferry disaster and its potential impact on the elections. And that's probably why we're hearing terms like angry mom, because they're expected to be quite angry or frustrated with the government's handling of the disaster with so many students dead, right?
Yeah, that's right. Experts say last month's ferry disaster has definitely affected public sentiment and that the election will be seen as a referendum on this incumbent government. Voter turnout and public sentiment among parents in their 40s are expected to be key factors in determining election results.
So anyone who's an incumbent and anyone who's running as a nominee of the opposition party, they'll have a certain advantage because of the disaster. Now it has truly become sort of a midterm evaluation of the President Park's performance in the past year and a half.
Well, speaking of this poll as being a referendum of the Park administration or the Conservative Party, there are two conservative strongholds that are actually being challenged by some of the opposition or independent candidates.
Yes, that's right. Political analysts say the independent candidates are getting support because the two cities feel the need to implement a sort of a system of checks and balances.
So the people of Busan, they've been electing the Saenuri candidate in every presidential election in the past, and they feel as if that even despite their consistent support, the presidents from the Saenuri party haven't really done enough for their region. And also pretty much the same thing in Gwangju.
However, in the city of Gwangju, voters are upset that MPAD co-leader An Cheol-soo decided to nominate Yoon Jang-hyun as his party's candidate without holding primaries.
I see. Now let's recap the latest polls that we got. Tell us about some of the most contested regions.
Yes, if we take a look, according to the most recent opinion polling from last week, the ruling Saenuri party had the upper hand in 6 regions, while the main opposition New Politics Alliance for Democracy held strong in 5 regions. And in 4 other regions, the rival party candidates were neck and neck. Independent candidates are running close with their counterparts in the city of Busan and Gwangju.
So where are the most important battlegrounds?
Well, according to the latest polls that were released on May 28th, Seoul, Incheon, and Gyeonggi-do province are the key battlegrounds since they hold half of Korea's total population and are seen as a stepping stone to the presidential ticket. Incumbent Seoul Mayor Park Won-soon held a comfortable lead by more than 18 percentage points against his Saenuri party rival Chung Mong-jun. In the port city of Incheon, incumbent Mayor Song Yong-gil was in a dead heat with his conservative counterpart Yoo Jung-bok with only a 3.2 percentage point difference. For the governor's seat in Gyeonggi-do province, the Saenuri party's Nam Kyung-pil held a slight lead with 36%, while Kim Jin-pyo of the main opposition New Politics Alliance for Democracy was at 34.7%. In the ruling party's stronghold of Busan, independent Oh Go-don was neck and neck with the Saenuri party candidate Seo Byung-soo. And the Liberals' power-based city of Gwangju, independent Kang Un-tae trailed behind the MPAD's Yoon Jang-hyun by 1.1 percentage points. In the 2 Chungcheong-do provinces, which are known to be swing regions, the MPAD's An Hee-jung and Lee Si-jong were last seen pulling ahead their ruling party rivals for governor posts.
I see. Now, well, it's tomorrow, and we'll be watching this very closely. Not only watching, we'll be working very hard and covering this elections, of course, right here on Arirang TV. Shin Byung-gil there, thank you so much for that report.
Sure.
Curry's comments came in response to
Your gateway to the day's biggest stories in Korea and around the world. Breaking news, the hottest interviews, and a whole lot more. Join Arirang Sean Lim and Kang Chae-ri from the heart of Seoul.
Begins now.
Primetime news, weeknights, live at 10 on Arirang TV.
For the first time, a U.S. official has spoken publicly about Washington's desire to deploy a U.S. missile defense system in South Korea. While you might think the move has North Korean threats in mind, analysts say it actually has more to do with China's rise. Kim Hyun-bin has this report.
The top commander for U.S. forces in Korea has asked Washington to deploy an advanced American missile defense system in Korea, a move that may push Seoul closer to joining Washington's missile defense system, along with Japan. Speaking at a lecture in Seoul on Tuesday, General Curtis Scaparrotti said he had recommended that the Pentagon set up the system known as a Terminal High Altitude Area Defense, or THAAD, to Korea. Scaparrotti's comments are the first from a U.S. official that confirm it is looking into deploying its high-altitude defense shield on the peninsula. THAAD is a U.S.-led missile defense system capable of intercepting ballistic missiles at high altitudes of up to 150 kilometers in their terminal phase. Earlier reports said that Washington had conducted a site survey for possible deployment locations for the THAAD system. But is it a good fit for South Korea?
THAAD is very controversial regarding the efficiency and adaptability and interoperability. A lot of concepts we should consider.
Some experts say the U.S. is not using the system to prevent threats from Pyongyang, but rather to counter China's growing presence in the region.
It's still too early to say that China is all against the Chinese rising military power. We should focus on North Korea's direct missile system and its North Korea's very provocative actions, including the post-nuclear test and another series of missile tests.
The recommendation is in the initial stages of consideration. General Scaparrotti said a final decision will come after close discussions between Korea and the U.S. Kim Hyun-bin, Arirang News.
Samsung is taking another step toward restructuring, and this one is being seen as another move to speed up the succession of ownership from the group chairman to his children. Samsung Everland, the de facto holding company of the group, says it plans to go public in the first quarter of 2015. Hwang Jie tells us more.
Samsung Everland will go public by next March. The de facto holding company of Korea's biggest conglomerate, Samsung, said Tuesday that it plans an initial public offering as part of efforts to become a global fashion and service company. The move, however, is widely seen by analysts as the next step in the conglomerate's succession plan as it relates to Samsung Electronics chairman Lee Gun-hee's 3 children. Currently, his son Tae-yong holds the largest 25% stake in Samsung Everland, while his 2 daughters, Poo-jin and Seo-hyun, each hold around an 8.5% stake. Chairman Lee holds a mere 3.7%. Analysts say the listing of Samsung Everland will give the chairman's children means to generate cash by selling shares in the company. The cash could be used to help pay inheritance taxes and buy shares in companies they want to control.
Samsung Group would need a lot of transaction costs in order to pay necessary taxes, in order to swap necessary stakes from one entity to the other.
Questions linger about Samsung's future as the group's de facto chairman Lee Gun-hee was hospitalized last month after suffering a heart attack. Many predict that the electronics and financial sector will be handed over to Lee's only son Tae-yong, the chemical and hotel sectors to first daughter Poo-jin, and the fashion and media sectors to second daughter Seo-hyun. Samsung Everland is expected to lay out a detailed schedule and procedures for the listing later this month. Hwang Jie, Arirang News.
Data from the month of May shows Korea's exports to China did not fare too well. It's causing Korean exporters to scramble to adapt and policymakers to chip in where they can. Kim Ji-yeon tells us more.
Korean exports to China plunged 9.4% in May on year due to an economic slowdown in the world's second largest economy. It's setting off alarm bells for the Korean economy, whose growth is heavily export reliant. Exports to China make up the greatest share at a quarter of Korea's total exports. What's particularly worrying is that a large chunk of Korean exports to China are in the form of raw materials or parts that are manufactured or reprocessed in China for re-exports to other countries. China increasingly shifting focus to domestic consumption from exports for its growth. The proportion of intermediate trade based on reprocessing dropped to 25% last year from 39% 6 years earlier. This is why Kang Do-yong of the Korea Institute for Industrial Economics and Trade highlights a need to expand the range of Korean goods exported to China.
One of the best ways for Korean exporters to weather the storm is to begin producing goods that can be sold in the Chinese local market, rather than goods that are merely used for reprocessing.
To help Korea's export companies respond to the changing landscape, Korea's Trade Ministry is planning to step in. They plan to promote more marketing and export exhibitions through related organizations like the Korea Trade Investment Promotion Agency. Kim Jeon, Arirang News.
The Korean cabinet has given the green light to an ambitious plan to cut back greenhouse gas emissions. The 5-year Green Growth Plan, approved Tuesday, seeks to reduce carbon emissions from the industrial sector by more than 56 million tons by 2018, starting with this year's target of 6.2 million tons. To accomplish these goals, a shift towards liquefied natural gas will be promoted within the refinery and steel industries. 200,000 electric vehicles will also be provided to cities across the nation by the year 2020, and railway systems will be expanded. Korea is currently the world's 7th worst offender when it comes to greenhouse gas emissions. And a similar move in Washington, the Obama administration has also announced its boldest step yet to reduce the nation's carbon emission from power plants, and it's drawing pushback from those with interests in the coal industry. Our Chae Yu-sun has the details.
But today EPA is proposing a clean power plan that will cut carbon pollution from our power sector by using clean energy sources and cutting energy waste.
The Obama administration's new plan requires America's 1,000 power plants to reduce their carbon dioxide emissions to 30% of 2005 levels by the year 2030. Nearly 2/5 of electricity in the U.S. is generated by coal-fueled plants. Each U.S. state has a number of ways to achieve this. They can increase their power plants' heat rates, rely more on natural gas or other sources for energy, and raise energy efficiency. The Environmental Protection Agency says more than $90 billion of climate and health-related costs will be saved from the plan, and up to 150,000 asthma attacks in children and over 3,000 heart attacks could be prevented.
Often these illnesses are aggravated by air pollution. Pollution from the same sources that release carbon and contribute to climate change. We've got to do more to reduce it.
Despite the government's assurances that the new rules will bring down electricity bills by 8% and encourage investment in new technologies, business groups and lawmakers from coal-reliant states oppose the initiative.
The administration has set out to kill coal and its 800,000 jobs. If it succeeds in death by regulation, we'll all be paying a lot more money for electricity.
After a period of public comment, the regulations will be finalized in June of next year, after which states can submit their own carbon reduction plans. Chae Yu-sun, Arirang News.
Voters in Syria have begun casting their ballots in presidential elections as a deadly civil war continues to rage across the country.
With more on that, our Paul Yee now joins us live from the news center. Paul, the Syria conflict has torn the nation apart, causing widespread poverty and displacing millions of residents. What does the government hope to accomplish with this election?
Well, many are seeing this election as a way for President Bashar al-Assad to consolidate his power over Syria and rally support against the rebels. But most Syrians say they're tired of the war and just want peace. Assad is running against two relatively unknown challengers who are pre-approved by parliament. It's the first time in half a century that Syrians have been offered any choice of candidates. Insurgents stepped up attacks in the build-up to the election, seeking to disrupt the vote.
The big majority of Syrians feel that this aggressive crisis should end and that they must get out of what happened and that what was happening should not continue.
President Assad is widely expected to win a third 7-year term in office, but his opponents, including rebel fighters and Western powers, say the election is a sham. Syria's civil war, now in its third year, has so far killed more than 160,000 people. And Russia has called for an emergency meeting at the UN Security Council in response to the worsening violence in eastern Ukraine. The 15-nation council met briefly behind closed doors on Monday to discuss a draft resolution calling for the immediate halt of military operations against pro-Russian separatists. Vitaly Chershkin, Russia's permanent representative to the UN, said that Kiev's large-scale military strikes had leveled residential areas, killing innocent civilians.
Our draft demands the immediate cessation of hostilities, urges parties to commit themselves to a sustainable ceasefire, and calls for the establishment by the parties of humanitarian corridors in order to allow the civilian population to live safely and to ensure humanitarian assistance.
Ukraine has slammed the draft resolution, calling it cynical and immoral. Kiev's UN representative Yuri Sergeyev accused Moscow of sponsoring terrorism and inciting the unrest in eastern Ukraine. And finally, technology giant Apple has kicked off its annual Worldwide Developers Conference in San Francisco, California. Apple started off this year's WWDC with a special keynote on Monday, putting key executives like Tim Cook and Craig Federighi front and center. The U.S. tech firm unveiled its revamped mobile and computer operating systems, calling it the biggest release since the launch of the original App Store 5 years ago. Apple also showed off its newest mobile applications that analyze your health and automate your home. But the announcement that stole the show was a new programming language called Swift, which claims to be faster and easier to use than the competition. And those looking for an Apple smartwatch or a larger iPhone will have to wait, as no new hardware was announced, despite growing rumors of the new product categories. That wraps up our look at international stories making headlines around the world. I'll see you back here tomorrow night.
Hello and welcome to Primetime Sports. I'm Stephen Che. Now, starting with the World Cup, the 32 participating nations have locked in their rosters, and now all that's left is the opening ceremony in São Paulo, Brazil. The deadline day for the final 23-man rosters came and went on Monday, and 736 footballers are listed to play. Some notable names missed or made the cut. For South Korea, left back Park Ju-ho was pegged to replace Kim Jin-soo days before the deadline. Colombia left out key man Radamel Falcao due to a serious knee injury, while Luis Suarez, who's recovering from knee surgery, was included on the roster for Uruguay. FIFA will confirm and post the rosters on their homepage by Thursday. And staying with football or soccer, depending on where you are in the world, Spain's top goal scorer David Villa is headed to Major League Soccer in the U.S., joining the New York City FC. Villa is the first to sign with the expansion team and is on a 3-year deal, and he'll headline the starting 11 come 2015. The MLS, which has been gradually growing in stature, gets a big boost in star power, while NYCFC gets a world-class striker to build their team. And heading to the NBA hardcourt, Defensive Player of the Year, the Bulls' Joakim Noah has been named on the league's all-defensive first team. Also joining him on the list are the Clippers' Chris Paul, the Warriors' Andre Iguodala, Paul George of the Pacers, and Serge Ibaka of the Thunder. And rounding the bases, let's get to Tuesday's top KBL matchup here in Korea. The Kia Tigers took on the Samsung Lions in Daegu. Now we go to the second inning. Lee Seung-yup, he gets on base, then Lee Ji-young hits him home. Samsung scores first there on the board. Now in the fourth, Kia's Park Ki-nam brings one home on this sac fly. It's tied 1-1. Now we go to the very next inning. Samsung's Choi Tae-in, he smacks a sac fly of his own to bring his team up in the scores. They add one more in the seventh on a Park Han-hee fielder's choice and another in the eighth. And they go on to win this one 4-1. And looking at the other games, we have NC defeating Nexon 5-3. Meanwhile, Hanwha Lotte and Tusan SK's games were rained out. Well, that's all I have for now. This has been Stephen Che. I'll see you back here later for more from the world of sports.
Well, what a rainy day we had here in Seoul, and it looks like it might continue through tomorrow morning in some parts.
Well, I hope it's not my part. And Kim Bo-kyung is standing by at the Weather Center with more. Bo-kyung, what can we expect?
Guys, the rain has brought down temperatures and it's beginning to feel a bit chilly outside. Now, on and off light drizzles are still falling at this hour. Well, the coastal regions of Gyeongsang-namdo province could get up to, at most, 80 millimeters of precipitation, and that may be accompanied by stormy conditions. Taking a look at our current conditions, today a low pressure system from the West Sea is leading to cloudy and rainy skies. Plus, we're looking at strong winds along the west and south coast regions. Now, this round of showers should come to an end by tomorrow morning in most areas, so there shouldn't be any trouble heading to the polls tomorrow. Taking a look at Wednesday's readings, expect a cloudy day in Seoul with daytime high reaching 28 degrees, while a mix of rain and clouds are in the picture for Daegu and Busan, peaking at 23 and 21. Moving on to other places, Daejeon and Jeju hit the mid-20s, Dokdo and Mount Kumgang should make it to 20 degrees. That's all the updates for this hour, but I'll be back with the latest after midnight.
Thank you, Bo-kyung, as always. Now, that will do it for this edition of Primetime News.
Thanks for being with us tonight, and see you back tomorrow.
And tomorrow is the local election day here in Korea.
So make sure to tune into Arirang News every 2 hours tomorrow for the latest poll results.
Good night, everyone.